2025 is a year of massive astrological shifts. Not only are all of the outer planets changing signs, but the lunar nodes have just moved into the signs of Virgo and Pisces, entering us into a brand new karmic cycle. We have a whole pileup of energy happening in Aries, which sparks so many new beginnings. And on top of all of that, we are at a grand solar maximum. Here to chat with me about the grand solar maximum and how this all fits together with the astrology is Chelsea Gantt, who is a brilliant professional astrologer. Welcome, Chelsea. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited, and there is no better time to talk about this than the Aquarius new moon, where
Oh
we
my gosh.
have a whole stellium of planets in Aquarius because it's a very intense, electrified energy, and this is the perfect time to have this conversation.
Absolutely. So, for you guys watching at home, we're recording this on the new moon in the sign of Aquarius, the lunar new year. You'll be seeing it a couple days later. But yeah, it's a powerful, potent time, and it's especially a potent time of really planning for what's coming up ahead for this year because it is that lunar new year. It is that potent point of like initiation, and this is a year of initiation. And before we dive into that, I just want to mention that if you want to find Chelsea, find her on TikTok. She is Chelsea Tantra on all the social platforms. She does brilliant short form content. I sometimes hate on the TikTokers that do astrology because they make up a lot of nonsense, but Chelsea is up leveling the astrology content on TikTok. Like she is one of the best. So you want to follow her there. Um, and she's also been working with me for about a year now, right? Like we've been working together for a
Yeah,
year.
exactly a year pretty much.
Yeah, and so she is one of the astrologers on my team. She also doubles sometimes as a teaching assistant because she's a brilliant teacher too, which is why she's going to teach you guys about the solar cycles and me too. I don't really know that much about the solar cycles. So maybe we should start there and dive in. Like what are these cycles? What is a grand solar maximum and how does that impact us?
So these cycles, they're kind of just this almost like a quiet backdrop to what's going on. And I am surprised that not too many astrologers mention it because I mean it's happening on our sun. So basically every approximately 11 years, the sun goes through its solar cycle. And so it begins in a solar minimum. And so if you look at the sun, the solar minimum basically, it's like there's not very many sunspots. The sunspots are these areas of heightened electromagnetic energy in the sun. It's like these little spots of increased magnetism, and they look like little freckles on the sun. But so during the solar minimum, you don't see very many. And basically, when we approach the solar maximum about 5 to 6 years after the solar minimum, when you look at the sun, and you can do this, I have an obsidian slab. It's like an obsidian mirror, and you can look at the sun. You can view the sun with it. Fun
Oh,
little
that's
fact:
so cool.
the Mayans used to use obsidian to view the eclipses. Like fun little fact.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it kind of works as like an eclipse lens. But you can also do it, you can look at the sun with it and you can see the sunspots. And so in 2024, when we had tons of large sunspots, I would look at the sun with my obsidian slab and you could see it's like little freckles on the sun. And so basically, during the solar maximum, it is a time when there's increased sunspots. These sunspots, they can create solar flares. And these solar flares, they lead to coronal mass ejections, and they send a lot of energy to our Earth through solar winds impacting our geomagnetic just terrain here on Earth. And so we saw this, a lot of us saw the auroras in 2024.
Mhm.
So in April and in November, when we had those solar storms coming from the sun, from the sunspots, when it sent these coronal mass ejections to Earth, it was a time of increased energy. There was a lot of energy coming onto Earth from the sun. You could see it in the auroras. And so it makes sense that, of course, it would impact us. It would impact our body. It alters the communication systems on Earth. It impacts satellites. It impacts radio signals, GPS. And so our communication systems are really impacted during the solar maximums. And it's a time of a lot of energy. So I want to, if you can share, could I share my screen, I kind of just want to show a few graphics
Yeah,
um,
go right
to,
ahead.
perfect, thank you. I just want to share a few graphics so that you guys can kind of understand what I am going on about here. Um, okay, so just some quick imaging. So if you look over here on the left, we have what the sun looks like during the solar minimum. And on the right, we have the solar maximum. So you can see there's increased energy. There's increased energy going on in the sun. So basically, this image on the left is from December 19th or December 2019 when we had our solar minimum. And the picture on the right was May 2024 when the sun is at its peak level. Well, we're not sure if it's quite at its peak of the solar maximum. That's the other thing is it takes a certain number of months of data to really understand if we have reached the maximum. And so here we go. Okay. And so here's another image of the sun,
It's still
kind
the
of,
same image.
okay. Are you sure?
Yeah, it hasn't been presented yet. There's just something that says solar minimum.
Um, you're not seeing this?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
It looks like you haven't presented
Um,
it yet. It says present full screen, and then it looks like that button hasn't been pushed.
okay. How about now?
No. Oh, there we go.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry about that. So, um,
There
okay,
we go.
so basically, this is the sun. This is what I was talking about with the sunspots. So you can see the solar minimum in December 2019. The sun, it didn't have any spots on it. And then when we look at the solar maximum from 2024, you can see all those little freckles on the sun. And so this is where there's an increased amount of energy on the sun, and it can reach us down here on Earth. So the one thing that I really wanted to highlight, and when I learned this, it really kind of just hit it home to me about how much the solar cycles impact us. So basically, there is this graph here, and a Russian scientist, Alexander Chevesky, I'm probably completely butchering that, but he studied the correlation between solar activity and significant events here on Earth. So, and this was over almost 200 years. So he analyzed historical data from 1749 until 1926. And so basically, where we have the blue lines here, they're tracking the historical events that were happening. And I don't remember how many countries he analyzed, but this was there was a large sample, like a sample study here. And so the blue is historical events that were happening on Earth, and the red lines that translates to the number of sunspots. And so where we have the peaks here at the top, these are the solar maximums. And so as you can see, this chart, you can see how aligned, how correlated historical events like revolutions, transformations in art like renaissances, activism, ultimately events that lead to massive societal shifts. And so, okay, so that's really, I really wanted to share you this graph so you could kind of understand how pivotal this is. And so when we think about it in a large scale, how it's able to impact societies, how it's able to impact our communication devices. What do we think it's happening to us? And there are also studies about how it can impact our cortisol levels. And so when we're having spikes in cortisol levels from these geomagnetic storms, we're experiencing anxiety, depression, insomnia. And also, there have been links to, so there are studies about how when, like during full moons, the ERs are more full. You would probably know this more.
Yeah.
Um, but so with the full moons, there's this increase in energy. But so similarly, during these solar maximums, there is an increase in things like accidents. There's a surge in cardiac issues. And so these impact people who are already susceptible, who might already have an underlying issue, or like the elderly.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so that's something that's been studied too. And so, I mean, even if you don't have a major health issue, like you can experience these just shifts within the body, and they kind of come and go in waves. This is so I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in the technicalities of the solar cycles, but I
Mhm.
have been tracking them for several years. And like there's an app that you can use, like Space Weather Live. If you go to the App Store, you can track it on your phone. It's free. Spaceweather.com is a great resource too, and you can get daily updates of what's going on in the sun and tracking the sunspots and the coronal mass ejections, the solar flares. And so, what I have noticed over the last several years of tracking this solar energy is when there are increases in geomagnetic energy, my body feels it. And so, sometimes for me personally, it can feel like I'm completely zapped. Or if you imagine like putting your finger in a socket, like an electrical socket, and getting this shock, this surge of energy, like there are times when I can feel this surge of energy going into my body. And so, yeah, if any of you are interested in this, I definitely invite you to learn about the solar cycles and to track them on a daily basis and see if it impacts you. See if you notice that you might feel differently. It might affect your mood, anxiety, different things like that.
So that is fascinating, and especially as a medical astrologer, I'm definitely going to start looking at this and tracking it like very closely because when you say that there's an increase in cortisol that's been found when there's these solar spikes, that impacts everything in the body. Like if you have any underlying conditions, any chronic conditions, like that's very likely to increase your symptoms and to make things worse across the board for like so many different things.
hmm
So I think that's important. Like that's something that everybody should know about.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I
Wow.
mean, like hormones, the nervous system, everything. And so that's why I think that this is so important. And not a lot of people are talking about it. And so basically, the two groups who really are like the scientists who are really tracking these solar cycles, it's NASA. And so, like the images that I had showed, they were created by NASA. And then
Mhm.
also NOAA, which is like Northern Oceanic Atmospheric Administration or something like that, NOAA. And so yeah, that's where a lot of the data is coming from. And so basically, they had announced in October 2024 that we've reached the solar maximum. But again, it's not necessarily something you don't realize that you're fully out of it until it's like several months down because of the way that they need a certain amount of data to really understand where exactly we are at that point, like when we're coming down from the peak. And so this is definitely something that we're still very much in
Okay.
and we're still navigating. And it really kind of translates also to the astrology.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I actually have a question about that to kind of backtrack. So you mentioned the auroras and the timing of that happening in April and November of last year. And that happened to coincide with like the eclipse seasons were pretty near those auroras. Is there something going on with the electromagnetic field of the Earth and the eclipses and these solar cycles that you know about, or was this just a coincidence?
Well, I don't think it was a coincidence, but when I was really researching this, like the solar activity and trying to correlate it to the astrology, and honestly, there's not a lot of evidence of data out there. And so, of course, this is speculation. But when I was first kind of trying to understand the two, what I really thought correlated was Pluto in Aquarius.
Mm.
Um, and so I know we've kind of been doing a back and forth with Pluto and Aquarius, but when you think about electromagnetism, I mean, if this Uranian Aquarian energy is electricity and all of this information that's fluttering around in the ethers all around space, Pluto is this energy of magnetism. And so that was kind of something I really thought that this was kind of coinciding, especially with Pluto changing signs.
Mhm.
Um, but that's a good point with the eclipses. I mean, I think it definitely makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, and it would make sense because the eclipses have like a specific gravitational pull on the Earth, and like there's all sorts of other stuff going on that impacts us really directly. And so, when you
Mm,
pair those two things together, like I don't know the physics behind it and the science behind it, but like in my brain, it makes sense that that would
yeah.
potentially cause something in the atmosphere.
Well, and so now that I think about it, so because the eclipses were happening in the Libra Aries axis, I think that would especially have something to do with it because the auroras are more common to happen during the equinoxes. And so
Oh,
that could also kind of relate to the timeline. I don't know if
interesting.
it's the kind of like just where we are in space, where the sun is. I'm not sure of the technicalities behind it, but that's kind of like a common known thing in the space weather community is that
Wow.
during the equinoxes, there's a heightened chance of auroras.
Okay. So that would make sense because there's these other activations of those areas like in our sky.
Mhm.
Weird. Okay. And then, so kind of moving forward. So you said that we potentially hit the peak last year. And so we're kind of coming down from that, but we're still very, very close to the peak. And we might still be at the peak. We're not 100% sure yet. So,
Exactly.
what does that look like when we pair it with just the wild, I mean, this year has started off crazy already, but like the astrology this year just gets more and more impactful, more and more intense. We have a lot of big shifts. We have so much Aries energy, which we
Mhm.
just discovered is connected with these auroras and the sunspots and all of that. What do you think this will bring in terms of these ups and downs with these big pivotal societal changes?
Well, I think that we could rewind a little bit and look at the early 80s
Okay.
when Saturn and Jupiter they gave us a peak of their conjunction in air signs. When they had their conjunctions in 1980 to 1981 in the sign of Libra. And so that was it was interrupting a little bit a 200-year cycle of Jupiter and Saturn forming conjunctions in Earth
Mhm.
signs. And so, what we got a glimpse of winter solstice 2020, when Saturn and Jupiter formed their conjunction at 0 degrees of Aquarius, that was setting off this new 200-year cycle of their conjunctions happening in air signs that we got a glimpse of in the early 80s. And so, what I believe these solar maximums do is I believe they lead to this quickening, this acceleration that's happening, because we see a lot of technological advancements during those times. And when we look at, and I mean, just advancements with those conjunctions in general, because when we look at their conjunction in Libra in the early 80s, it was like the energy of video killed the radio star, like the first MTV music video. The ages were just changing. And I think that that is exactly what we are experiencing now that began to accelerate when Jupiter and Saturn formed their conjunction at 0 degrees of Aquarius in 2020, the exact point that Pluto has been triggering and activating since what, 2023, 20, it's all
Yeah.
2023. And so that's what I really think is happening is we're in this time period now where because yeah, there's a lot of Aries energy and that's a whole other kind of area that's really correlating with all of this. But we're also in this period of time where we're shifting from this heavy, dense earth energy into
Mhm.
that of communication, technological focused air energy. And things are accelerating and things are moving so much quicker. And a lot of that is because our technology is advancing. And then also kind of looking at 2025, how we've already had so many significant events. It's like the groundbreaking events that are happening closer and closer together.
Absolutely. And like, so we're pairing this energy with the solar cycle with Pluto fully moving into the sign of Aquarius, which it did at the end of last year. Now it's there for good. And it's like, as soon as Pluto like was like, I'm in Aquarius now forever. Not forever, but I'm here for a while, right? I'm staying. I'm not going back anymore. it was like everything was just warp speed ahead, especially with anything and everything to do with technology. I even talked about this like in a video I did for the Pluto and Aquarius just forecast, like the general forecast. I mentioned this shift from being Pluto in Capricorn and us being in kind of like a plutocracy where the corporations and the government are like one big glob, and us shifting from that into more of a technocracy when Pluto moves into Aquarius. And we've seen in the past like 2 weeks that just accelerate exponentially all of a sudden, all at once. And so, but pairing that with the fact that technology is advancing so rapidly that I can't even keep up with what the heck is going on and everything else that's happening with the solar cycles, like it just feels like even without all the Aries energy this year, that this is a big before and after. Like what happened before 2025 is going to be very different from what the entire world and all of our lives look like after 2025. This is that moment, that dividing line. Like if they're probably going to name it something like the pre something and then like the post. Like that's how significant this is.
Yeah, it's a whole new paradigm. And there's definitely been a leading up to that. But it's interesting because, yeah, as soon as the sun formed its first conjunction with Pluto, that was what I think really ignited it. It was illuminating everything that's been happening kind of quietly beneath the surface, sort of hidden in the shadows. The sun goes and it's like, this is going on. And then suddenly it's like, welcome to the technocracy. Like you are in it.
Yes.
And then also we're going to have Mercury. Well, I mean, we've got the new moon now, and then Mercury is going to illuminate. Also, it's going to be giving us messages of what exactly this all means. I feel like even just this week alone, we're going to be finding out a lot about Pluto and Aquarius, about what it's going to bring for us. And yeah, it's a wild ride.
It's definitely a wild ride. And so we have this going on, right? So this technological acceleration, we have these solar maximums and these sunspots and all of this stuff that's impacting our bodies and our society. And then we also have what we were talking about before, this Aries energy. So we have Saturn shifting from the last sign of the zodiac into the first, and we have the same thing going on with Neptune. And then we have a ton of Aries energy happening this spring. This is something that you just pointed out off camera, where we have Venus going retrograde, we have Mercury going retrograde, we have the final eclipse in Aries, and something that Chelsea noticed that I failed to recognize until just then is the fact that these are all happening at the same degree in the sign of Aries. So there's this very potentized, just palpable energy about like right now it feels like we're waiting for something, like it's like something's about to happen but it's not fully formed on a personal level but also on a societal level. I think a lot of people are feeling that like it's a pressure, like we need to do something, but like what does that look like, and like that it's premature right now. um
Yeah. So it's like, what do we do? I think we really need to ground to be present. And that's a big thing too. When I was learning about the solar cycles and how they can impact our body, is understanding how we are able to bring our body into a state of coherence. And like, there's so much incoherence going on, there's so much instability, things feel so uncertain. And so it's up to us to kind of take our power, take our energy into our own hands, ground our energy, understand what tools work best for us, whether it's meditation, sound healing, essential oils, herbs. Like we all have something that we can lean into. And this was something too that I was saying a lot with Saturn just entering into Pisces. It's like, well, obviously, and then on top of that, with Neptune finalizing Pisces, and now the North Node is there, like there's so much that's like, there's so many illusions, there's so much propaganda, and we're really having to question like what's real, what's not.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily like this analytical research kind of thing that we do to figure out what's real. It's calming our body, anchoring our energy, and going within and checking in with our heart, coming into our heart and really tapping into our inner internal compass and guidance system. And I think that's what, like when things are sounding really noisy and when there's just so much going on, we don't know what to focus our energy into. That's what I think is so important right now is focusing within, tuning out the noise and understanding again, like the tools that work best for us to navigate these times because we need to build up our spiritual protection and just our strength right now at a very deep energetic level. That's what I think.
Absolutely. And it's like we're shifting from this period of like right now, everything is being felt so much more intensely because of all that Pisces energy and that breaking down of boundaries. And it's also, like you said, this time to turn in where it's more of an internalized energy. But then we're going to be very quickly catapulting into this externalization of that energy, like taking that and turning it into action. So, like right now, more than ever, is the time to kind of be quiet and feel it out because you're about to have to do some stuff.
Yeah. So, what I thought was really funny, so when I was kind of researching Neptune going into Aries in the 1800s, when Neptune made this shift. So, when it was in Pisces, that was during the Romantic movement in art. And so, art kind of had this romantic sort of energy to it, romanticism. And then, when Neptune entered into Aries, it shifted to realism.
Mm.
And so I think that is a really powerful metaphor of this, of what we're moving into.
Do you think people are going to be calling more for, because it's like Saturn moved into the Pisces and all of a sudden like AI artwork and AI everything was just everywhere. And it was like, what the heck is real? Everything's made of chat GPT.
The
Do you
deep
think it's going to be like a
fakes.
call for like making things real again?
Well, I think things are about to get real. Like I think like, that's what I think. I wasn't even thinking necessarily like physically, but like no, like I think things are about to take a very serious turn kind of in ways. And I mean, I don't say that to kind of to scare people, but
Mhm.
they're I mean, like you said, like 2025 is this very pivotal. There's going to be a very clear before 2025 and after 2025. And I think there is something that's very serious about what's going on. And that's kind of what I mean. It's like, yeah, it's going from a romanticism where maybe we're having to take off the rose-colored glasses
Mhm.
in whatever area of our lives Neptune has been in since 2011, 2012, because things are about to get real. That's
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay. So we have these energies paired together, they're amplified. Is there any way to predict when these like solar flares and these spikes in solar activity will be happening throughout the year? Or is that something where we just have to sit and wait and like when it happens, it happens?
Well, 2024 was when we were having a lot of X-class solar flares. So the solar flares, they're kind of classed in there's like A and B, which are super low, like not even noticeable. And then there's C class, there's M class, which are kind of like moderate to medium. And then the X class solar flares are the very powerful ones that can lead to a lot of geomagnetic disturbance here and impact the communication systems. And so I mean, we're still so early into 2025. We did start off the year with some X-class solar flares. Over the past week or two, we've had a lot of coronal holes, which are these like big electromagnetic sort of holes. Like it's this magnetism kind of build up in these large spaces on the sun, and they kind of lead to increased wind streams. And so we're still very much moving through navigating these energies as far as predicting the solar flares and stuff like that. It's not really something that can be predicted. And I think just the whole study on space weather is something that, I mean, I think there's a lot of unknown about it. I think even just the way that they predict the solar maximum, it's like you don't know you're fully out of it until it's over, really. And so I think there's a lot of unpredictability that goes along with the solar maximum.
Okay, that makes sense. So the things we can predict are the astrology. The things that we know are probably going to be a thing, but we can't predict exactly when is these like solar maximums and these ejections and all these other things that are happening in the background. So when you work with your clients, so for those of you who don't know, Chelsea is a practicing astrologer. You can totally book a reading with her. I'll link it down below. She's brilliant. You should. But when you're working with clients, how do you factor in the solar energy with what's going on astrologically, or do you factor that in?
I mean, when we're moving through a time of a lot of solar flares, that's definitely something that I mention is protecting the nervous system because that's really, I mean, and everyone kind of receives this energy differently, but I feel like the nervous system is such an important kind of area to focus. And it's all about, like what I had said before, is understanding how you can bring your body into a state of coherence. That's really important because yeah, we do have all of this increased energy going on that can literally lead to societal shifts and transitions. But we have the power to kind of take our energy into our own hands. Like, yeah, it can feel very unstable, but we can also settle our energy. And so that's definitely something that I always mention is understand what that thing is for you that can help calm your energy, that can help ground your energy. And of course, it depends what's going on. Like maybe someone's having a big Mars activation and they need to literally exert physical energy. So it's like go out for a walk, spend time in nature, you know? So there's definitely a lot of different factors, but that's kind of something that I'll factor in is if they have a certain planetary activation going on, you know, like if it's Mercury, definitely protect your nervous system. If there's a lot of cardinal activations, what can you do to support your cortisol levels? How can you, like, do you feel like you are in an extended just period of a fight flight response? And so kind of like it definitely depends, but I'll sort of look at where the activations are happening in their chart. And yeah, I mean, the space weather, it's always kind of something that I keep in the back of my mind and I track it frequently just to kind of understand the vibes. But yeah, it definitely depends. And I do think that when we have our own individual activations going on in our chart, that can definitely impact the way that we're receiving this energy.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Is there anything else that we missed that we need to fill everyone in on with all of the things that are going on this year?
Um, well, we still have some time before Uranus entering into Gemini, but I feel like that's a big part of it too.
Yeah,
And
that makes a lot of sense because Uranus is electricity. And this is
yes,
all about like energy, electricity, electromagnetic fields. Like that's very Uranian.
yeah, and it also kind of ties into this technological age that we've entered into with Pluto and Aquarius.
Hmm.
And so basically in the 1800s, when was it? It was, I think, 1859. So it was actually one of the last times that Uranus was in Gemini. Um, yeah, 1859. During the solar maximum, there was something a lot of people are probably familiar with is the Carrington event. And so it was a very large solar flare. It was like an X40 or larger. To give you kind of a reference, when we had the auroras going on last May, it was almost an X9 solar flare that led to that geomagnetic disturbance. And so the Carrington event was like an X40 plus. And basically, what happened, and this is something that Uranus is really going to be emphasizing, I think, as it moves into Gemini. So during the Carrington event, that was when they were using the telegraph.
Mhm.
And so something that I think will happen with Uranus in Gemini is that communication systems that have weak spots, like it will be exposed. So basically, when the Carrington event happened in 1859, it was like this. It looked like even at night, it was like daytime because of just the energy coming off of the sun. And people who worked with the telegraphs, I mean, people were getting shocked. There were sparks coming off of the telegraphs, even different technology. I don't know exactly what they had back then, but and it might have been the Telegraph when I was reading about this, but basically, it seemed like things were on even though they were completely zapped and turned off. And so they were still running somehow on just the excessive energy that came through. And so I think that that's something that we'll also see. is our technology kind of being just the weak spots of it being exposed. And it's going to lead to a transformation in the way that we communicate, in the technology that we utilize to communicate. And it's interesting because we're going to be seeing this alignment with Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. And they're going to be, like Pluto and Uranus are going to be forming an air trine with one another as they sextile Neptune and Saturn in Aries. And so there's this whole conversation with the larger outer planets going on. And I think ultimately what that conversation is about is this transition. It's literally entering into a completely new era. And the way that we communicate, the way that we process information, everything, the technology that we utilize to communicate, everything's going to be transforming. And I think it could even be as extreme as literally having a new internet or some sort of new technology that completely just comes out of nowhere that transforms our world so rapidly.
Absolutely. And I mean, it could be something like AI, but I feel like there's something else coming that we can't conceive of yet.
Hmm.
And the seeds of that are happening now.
Yeah,
So, do you think it could be like another one of those events that happens this year where there's a
the Carrington
crazy,
event.
yeah, because if
I
that happened
don't,
now, like they only had the telegraph, like we're using so much more electricity. Our technology is everywhere. It dominates our entire lives. It's way more complicated and advanced.
yeah,
And I don't think that we're protected from that if it does
no.
happen.
Yeah, I know like satellites would literally fall out of the sky today.
Oh, great.
And I mean, it's well known. Yeah, of course, like if something like the Carrington event did happen today, our whole world would stop. And of course, there's speculation. Of course, it's possible. It's happened before. Do I think it's a concern? I personally don't.
Okay.
I don't think it's anything to move through life being scared of or just fearful of. I
Mhm.
will say in 1989, during the solar maximum, there was a large solar flare. It was an X28, so that is very large. But basically, it led to or sorry, no, that was an X15. But basically, it led to a blackout on Canada's power grid. And so Canada was completely blacked out. And so, I mean, this has happened in our modern recent times. Um, but I don't think that's something that we have to have. I don't know. I just don't think that's something that we need to worry about. I think, again, like the focus is just worrying about our body, ourselves, and how we are navigating these shifts. Because I think also there's a really big opportunity here where these energies, where they lead to revolutions, they can also lead to technological breakthroughs and advancements. And so we're also able to work with this energy and create some really amazing, incredible things in our lives, whether it's how we show up for other people, what it is that we're offering other people to help navigate these times. Um, I think that that's really where our power is. I don't think we should necessarily be focusing on things outside of our control and
Mhm.
worrying. And it's a big, we just have to focus on what we can control and let go of the rest.
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel the same way. You can only do what you can do, right? Like you can't control the solar weather and
Yeah.
whether or not there's going to be something like wild that happens externally, but you can have awareness of these things and control what you do and, maybe be a little bit prepared, like have some,
Yeah.
food stashed away or whatever it is that you want to do to make yourself feel better. But in the end, like there's not really much you can do about it if it does happen. So
Exactly.
worry about what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and talking about having food stash, that's the other thing too, because this increased space weather can lead to major weather events here on
Yeah.
Earth. And I know, of course, there's speculation about how much is actually natural and, but I mean, has been a surge in earthquakes. I mean, look at also the hurricanes that we had. We had a really active hurricane season in the fall. And so, yeah, talking about like having a little stash, being prepared. being aware of your environment. If you do hear of, weather events coming your way, just, yeah, make sure that you have everything to be prepared for that.
So I have one last question. This is going to be a little controversial, but there will be people in the comments who say this is all nonsense. It's all HARP. Everything is HARP. The government made the auroras. And I'm open to all possibilities. I'm open to that actually being a real thing. But in your personal opinion and through your research, what do you think about the interaction between weather modification programs and what's going on with the solar weather? And is
I
there
mean,
any interaction?
I mean, I obviously they're tracking this as well. They probably have a lot better data than we have. And I think that they are likely probably influencing certain things. Um, but that being said, also where we do have this big focus, because yes, we have a lot of focus of Aries energy, especially coming up, but we do have a big focus also in Pisces. And with Pisces, and especially like with this big Neptunian energy of Neptune finalizing its transit in Pisces, there's this big emphasis in what do you believe? And so I don't think it has anything to do with me to tell other people what to believe,
Yeah,
but our beliefs are so powerful that we can literally transform our reality with them. And so that's the other thing too, I think that's important is, and I love conspiracies. I love going down rabbit holes, but I have to stop myself sometimes. And especially, I think in the period of time that we're moving into, it's going to be really important to stay grounded and to focus on what we can control and kind of relinquish the rest.
absolutely. Yeah, I agree. That's a nice way of not fully answering the question. We'll leave it up to you guys to decide.
Yeah, who am I to say? I just had some information to share. I think that the solar maximum, it's impacting our body a lot, and you guys should know.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been a fascinating conversation. I know everybody's going to love it. If people want to find you, remind them again where they can do that.
You can find me Chelsea Tantra everywhere, mostly active on TikTok. I am also on YouTube, and I have a Substack.
All right. And I will post her links down below and make sure you book a reading with Chelsea before she gets booked up because everybody wants one.
Thank
She's
you so
very good at
much.
what she does and very accurate with her predictions. And obviously, she knows a lot, not just about general astrology and doing forecasts and things like that, but she is also a brilliant medical astrologer. She's graduated from my medical astrology program and she doubles sometimes as a teaching assistant, even. That's how knowledgeable she is. So, she's very, very brilliant. People are always asking me where to go for medical astrology. I would say Chelsea is a pretty good resource.
Oh,
So,
thank you
again,
so
check her out
much.
down below. And thank you so much for doing this. This has been so fun.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun.
All right. Bye, everyone.